Hello everyone, this is ECE 4960 or otherwise known as Senior Design 2 and we are Team 3. The project that we have decided to do this semester is to design and build a puzzle solving robot with a budget under $400. The objective for this project is to have an automated Sudoku/crossword solver that should be able to solve and fill in the grid of a puzzle with correct answers within 5 minutes. The motivation for this project from the software side was applying content from our ECE technical courses, focusing on natural language artificial intelligence models, as well as camera vision. From the hardware side, we are applying our experience from microcontrollers and electronics lab. On this slide, our goal is to deliver an automated Sudoku/crossword solver. Next, our deliverables are separated under computer vision and final deliverables. Begin with, under computer vision, our webcam should be able to identify a puzzle located on a sheet of paper and employ image masking techniques to isolate and extract the puzzle from the background. As well as it will be able to format the puzzle's initial state into a 2D array of characters and numbers. Next, our final deliverable is that our automated solver is able to solve and fill in the grids of the puzzle with the correct answers within 5 minutes, as well as it is being capable of writing all 26 letters and numbers from 0 to 9. It will also contain a clue detaching algorithm to determine what answer is required to solve the problem, as well as it will be able to solve puzzles with known answers to test results from our puzzle algorithm. On this slide, this is what our final project currently looks like. Then on this slide, it explains how everything interfaces with each other. To begin with, our input is collected from our camera, which is the picture of the puzzle, and then it is transmitted to the Raspberry Pi. And at the same time, it works with our user interface, which is our touchscreen monitor, to pick out what puzzle that we are working on. Next, the Raspberry Pi uses the algorithm to solve the puzzle, then outputs the directions to the plotter and the writing mechanism after it's done being solved. And within 1 to 2 minutes, it should be able to fill in all the boxes of our puzzle.
Hardware design requirements. For our electronics, we set out to have a Raspberry Pi 4 Model B, any type of electronic display, a camera of 1080p resolution so it could read the hints better, a solder breadboard to limit connection errors instead of using a traditional breadboard. For the motors, we have a servo motor we want to get between 0 and 90 degrees, a stepper motor that will be along the X and Y axes to rotate about 50 to 200 RPMs. Our camera mount needs to be stable to hold the camera. The pen holder is also going to be stable and it needs to be lifted up and down with the servo motor. And the base of the gantry system and the plywood base frame is what we also want to have sturdy and well made. And for our design that we actually did, so we stuck with the Raspberry Pi. We used a 7-inch 800 by 480 TFT Raspberry Pi DSi capacitive touchscreen, so it would work well with the Raspberry Pi. We did create a solid breadboard for 3 stepper motor drivers, and we had the C930 Logitech camera, which fit our qualifications from before. The motors, we used 3 NEMA 17 stepper motors, and they ran at 110 to 120 RPM, and our servo motor is from 0 to 90 degrees it can turn, so that's exactly how we wanted it. Our camera mount was made of aluminum extrusion with 3D printed base, angle, and camera pieces. The camera is facing downward at the paper, and it doesn't move at all. The camera mount does not move at all because it's installed permanently. The pen holder is reinforced with springs and zip ties, and it uses wheels and the belt to move in the Y direction. The base, for the base, as I said before, we had a plywood bottom, and installed into that would be, on top of it would be the gantry and all of the 3D printed pieces that we have screws into. So the base itself is not moving.
Our software design requirements went hand in hand with our hardware requirements. First, drawn letters must fit in 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch cells. A robot must be able to write all 26 letters in numbers 0 through 9. The total solve time for both crossword and Sudoku puzzles must be less than 5 minutes, including the read time, solve time, and the time to write on the paper. And lastly, we wanted our interface to be user-friendly for an intuitive user experience. We wanted anyone walking up to our robot to immediately know what to do.
Here we can see the flowchart for the crossword software design. The function is initialized with the start-stop button on our user-friendly interface. If the user specifies that the puzzle will be a crossword puzzle, the camera will take a picture of the game board. This image will be processed using our camera vision, and the grid and hints will be given to the solution generation function, which will scan the hints given and gather data about the puzzle. Potential words will be generated using the GPT-4 model created by OpenAI, and this list will be filtered to match the word lengths of the puzzle. A recursive backtracking algorithm is used to test word pairs in order to form a valid puzzle solution. Once a puzzle solution has been generated, the prototype will write the puzzle answers on the correct location of the paper. After the puzzle has been physically solved, the user will be prompted with a play again option. The flowchart for the Sudoku puzzle follows a very similar pattern. Once the puzzle has been selected to be Sudoku, the camera will take a picture to be processed by our camera vision. The Sudoku grid with any pre-existing numbers will be given to the solution function. This function will generate a valid answer that follows the rules of Sudoku. This puzzle will be written on paper, and the user will be prompted with a play again option. Here is a further explanation of both functions, as well as the output from the crossword solution function. For each crossword puzzle clue, multiple words will be generated that are potential answers. Some clues will generate fewer answers than others because of word length limitations that were filtered out. The backtracking function will test many word combinations in order to determine the answer for the puzzle.
Our computer vision mainly relied on two different technologies: OpenCV, a computer vision library developed by Intel, and Tesseract, an ocular character recognition library maintained by Google. We would use OpenCV to do grid detection and calculate the dimensions of the game space, while using Tesseract to read the individual Sudoku cells and crossword hints to determine their string values. For the crossword, we would use OpenCV to isolate the game space into a new image and split it into a 5x5 grid. Using that image mask, we would then iterate through every cell and determine the color of the center pixel to find out whether that cell was a valid character space. Lastly, we would run the Tesseract image. For crossword, we would use OpenCV to isolate the game space into a new image and split it into a 5x5 grid. Using that image mask, we would then determine the color of the center pixel of each cell to find out whether or not it was a valid character space, or whether or not we could write a letter in that cell. Lastly, we would run the Tesseract engine on the image and parse the clue text based on the known format of the puzzle. For Sudoku, we did something similar. We again used OpenCV to isolate the game space, but this time we split it into a 9x9 grid. Then we ran Tesseract independently on each cell to determine whether or not a number occupied that space and which number that was.
Next up, we will be talking about the firmware of the robot, or the control of the hardware motors through our software. I will be using the PyGPIO library from Python running on our Raspberry Pi, which creates a hardware PWM signal. I wrote all the code from scratch to allow us to have a lightweight and accurate motor movements while also running very quickly. I created a basic command line interface as shown here to allow us to test all the different parts of the robot very quickly and to test each part's functionality to ensure it is correct before moving on to more complex pieces like drawing the different shapes or drawing alphabet. I also use the firmware to track the current position of the pen as shown up here to know where the pen's location is at all times, which I will talk about in detail in a minute. To control the stepper motors, I'm using a 5 kHz PWM signal running at a 50% duty cycle. This allows me to control the X and the Y axis of the robot independently by moving either the X or the Y axis, or to move them both at the same time to create slope lines by moving both axes at the same time. To do this, I adjust the frequency of each axis PWM signal based on the total distance that I calculate the travel needed to be. I also created a function to raise and lower the pen using our servo motor, and this incorporates a short sleep at the end of the raise and the lower segments to make sure that the pen is fully up or down before either axes start to move, and this is to ensure that we have continuous line segments with no gaps in there. Like I talked about earlier, I also keep track of the current location of the pen throughout the entire running of the robot. And this is to ensure that we will not exceed our hardware limits and we will not exceed any limitations that our robot may have. The basic flowchart for the firmware starts when we start solving the puzzle. First, we check if there are any squares that still need to be filled in. If there are more squares, we convert the pixel centroid location into the inch centroid location, which the robot will use to move. Once we have our inch measurement, we will check to make sure this measurement is not outside of our limits. If it is outside of our limits, we get a soft error, the robot does not move, and we go on to the next square. If we are within our limits, we move to that centroid point location, and then from there we start to draw our letter or number. After we have drawn our letter or number, we go and check if there are more squares to draw. Once we have all the squares drawn, our puzzle has finished being solved. Lastly, I created a custom font. This allows me to eliminate the need to draw arcs and circles and to speed up the overall movement for each of the letters or numbers. To do this, I used a few basic building blocks that I created, like the slope lines in the top of the K or the straight lines in the bottom of the L here. And this is to ensure that each character is unique from all the other characters, like the 0 and the O, and to make sure each character is easily able to be read. I also base each character here on this little green rectangle. This green rectangle is inside this big pink box. This box is each square of the puzzle. And the side of the box here is a length that I will use to parameterize all the lengths of the letters and the numbers. And this is to ensure that when the puzzle grows or shrinks, if we're playing crossword or Sudoku, that the robot can easily still draw each letter while still being able to read it effectively, as we talked about before. We did also run into a couple challenges throughout our process of designing and building our robot. In the hardware, we ran into a problem where the x-axis was not moving very smoothly, and we figured out this was based on our rails not being orthogonal and not being parallel. So once we fixed this, it was still moving a little jagged, so we added some smooth rods to the end of the tooth gears to allow these gears to spin freely. This fixed our x-axis from moving in a jagged manner to a smooth manner. Our motors were also moving jaggedly as well, and so a way we fixed this was by restarting our Raspberry Pi, and this fixed the PWM signal. Another way we fixed this was adjust the current that our motor drivers were putting out to the motors, and this made for smooth motor control of our hardware. In the software, we ran into some errors with our character recognition library needing a 64-bit operating system. But since our Pi has a 32-bit operating system, we had to switch to a new character recognition library. This new library struggles to detect 5s and 9s, but we can still solve our Sudoku puzzle with this limitation. We just will sometimes write over the 5s and 9s that are printed out. Our crossword puzzle also struggles answering multi-word answers like once a day or local clues like see clue number 1 for the answer to clue number 6. And so this is a limitation we had with the crossword. And lastly, we had some issues with our software getting the motors to move smoothly at angled lines. But with a little bit of math, we were able to get this solved easily. A couple areas that we could take our robot would be to create a 3D printed box to house the electronics, which we have already started to implement. Another area that we can improve our robot is to fine tune the motor movement to make it move a little bit smoother and a little bit faster. As we discussed before, we can also improve our character recognition of the 5s and 9s, and we could upgrade our Raspberry Pi to a 64-bit Pi to allow for different character recognition libraries and different libraries of any sorts. And lastly, a fun thought we would have would be to add the functionality to be able to solve more newspaper games like a word search.
Overall, the project was a massive success. We were able to implement an automated crossword and Sudoku solving robot that can be adapted to different puzzles. This project has allowed us to develop desired experience with different skill sets, such as computer vision, firmware development, and back-end software development. Thank you.